In this example, I want to look at the scan, query, and filter operations in DynamoDB against a local instance of DynamoDB, specifically within a Windows command prompt. So I have a Windows command prompt that has DynamoDB, a local version of it running in the background. And I've also loaded the baseball stats table that we've worked out with for this course. And then I have another command prompt open so that we can run some of our commands. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to run a command to show you the tables on my local instance. So I'm going to use AWS DynamoDB, and then the command is going to be list tables. And the only parameter that I have to provide is the endpoint URL, and I'm actually going to do that using a line continuation character, which in the case of a command prompt is this caret operator. It's actually the shift key in 6. So it's asking if there's more information, and there is some more information, which is the endpoint URL, and that's going to be against my local machine. So I'm going against localhost :8000, and we should see that there's one table called baseball stats. Okay, and what I'm going to do is, if I hit the up arrow, you'll see that it only goes line by line through my commands. So it's kind of unfortunate, but I should be able to create a text file that keeps track of these commands, and then I'll share them with you at the end. So I have my AWS DynamoDB list tables. I'm going to copy that. And then my endpoint URL, I'll copy that as well. And I'll bring that over to the Notepad. Okay, so I'll kind of update this Notepad file with the commands that we run in this example, and then I'll ultimately share this text file with you through Slack. Okay, so right now we're able to list the tables. I want to be able to see all the data, so I've already seeded the data with all the games and the players and teams from that data set that we have. So the next command that I want to run is DynamoDB scan, and then it's going to take one parameter, which is the table name. So I want to scan a specific table. The table that I want to scan is baseball stats, and then I need one additional parameter, which is that endpoint URL, being my local machine. So I'm going to go ahead and issue that command. I'm just going to make this window a little bit bigger, make it a little taller, and I think I got to do it through the buffer size. So if I change that to 80, that doesn't look like that's what actually did it. I'm just kind of changing the layout, screen size, screen width, height. I guess I can make that 12,000. It doesn't look like it's allowing me to do that, so I'll just make it full screen. And then we should be able to scan, and you'll see I'm able to hit enter, and that goes line by line through my data set, or I can hit the space bar and that'll page through my data set. So I got the font blown up pretty big, but ultimately you can see that there's 23 records in that record set. Okay, and I'm just going to arrow up to get all of the commands that we grabbed. So I'm just going to copy the scan command, and I'm just copying and pasting because I want to make sure that I have the exact command that I know is working, that I'm putting inside this text file. Okay, so our table name, and then our endpoint URL. Okay, so we're able to do a scan. Okay, and then I'll escape out of that. I want to next do a query. Okay, so with our query, I'm going to do an AWS DynamoDB query. Again, line continuation against our specific table, so our table name is baseball stats. and then our endpoint URL. So we're pointing at our local machine. And then we finally get into the query situation, which is I want to set up a condition where I'm querying based on a key value. So the key being the team ID, what I want to do is I want to look for a specific team ID. In this case, I'm looking for a team ID it matches player info underscore LAA to look at the team, or I'm sorry, the players that belong to the Los Angeles Angels. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a key condition expression. And that's where the team ID is equal to a specific variable. This specific variable I'm going to call T. It really can be anything, but I'm calling my variable name T there. And then I have to provide the value of :T through a parameter called the expression attribute values. Okay, and the expression attribute values comes as a JSON object. Okay, so my JSON object is where I define :T, and :T is going to be another object that starts as a string. So :T is a string that has a value of player info underscore LAA. Okay, so all of this has to be quoted. So I have to have beginning and ending double quotes around the whole thing, around that whole JSON string. So I'll go ahead and add those. So there's the beginning quote, and then if I get to the end of the line, here's the end of the quote. But that causes a mismatch in quotes. So this double quote where my arrow is, and this double quote where my arrow is, that can be considered a beginning and ending pair. But that's not really what I want. I want the quote where my arrow is right now to be the beginning, and the quote where my arrow is now as the end. So I want those two to be the beginning and end. All the stuff in between I want to be literal double quotes. So in order for that to happen, I have to use an escape character. So I'm just going back to the beginning of the line. I hit the arrow key, and then I'm going to use the backslash to escape all of those double quotes. Okay, so I'm just putting a backslash in front of them. And what that backslash does, they call it an escape character. What it really means is the next character in the sequence is a literal character. It might have other meaning in terms of what it means on a command prompt, but in this case, I don't want it to have that other meaning of being a beginning or ending of a string. What I want it to be is I want it to be a literal double quote. That's what the escape character means. Okay, so now we have a query where the team ID is equal to player info underscore LAA, and if I've done this correctly, you can see that we have 4 records. Okay, so I'm going to arrow up through that query command so that we can copy and paste it over to our notepad file, just so I have a record of what we did. Okay, so our table name, and our endpoint URL, and our filter expression, or sorry, key condition expression, because we're doing that on a query, and then our expression attribute values. Okay, so there's a query. Okay, what I want to do is I want to take this query one step further, in that I want to take this query and I want to add to it a filter expression. So I want to get all the way to our key condition expression. Okay, so I basically want to run the same query command all the way to our key condition expression, and then I'm going to add another expression, which is a filter expression. So I want to filter for a specific player. So I want to look for Cole Calhoun in this case. So I want to do a filter for a specific player on the Angels, where the player name equals a specific player name. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my arrow keys to kind of get back to my query. So I'm doing another query with the table name being baseball stats, my endpoint URL being localhost 8000. My key condition expression is still going to stick around, but I'm going to add another expression, and this is going to be a filter expression. And the filter expression in this case is going to be player name equal to :player. Okay, in this case I have a variable named :t and another variable named :player. And I do this just to show you that it's not some magical way of creating a variable by having a single character there. I can use descriptive names for the variables, and I probably should, but for the most part people don't. They'll use kind of single variable names, but I'm going to use player in this case. And now I have to supply my expression attribute values. But there's actually two values, so now my expression attribute values are actually plural. I have to supply a value for :t and for :player. So I'm going to have a JSON string that has both of those values. So I'm going to just start by writing out the JSON. So I'm going to say that :t is equal to some JSON object, and :p is equal to some JSON object. Okay, so :t is an object that is a string that has a value. This is the team ID again, remember, so it's going to be player info underscore LAA. And then :p is also a string that has a value of Cole Calhoun. Okay, so I think that's the correct JSON that I'm looking for. And now I have to worry about how do I get this quoted. So here's my closing quotes. And if I scroll all the way over to the front of the string, here's my beginning quotes. And then everything in between I have to go back and escape. So I'm just going to use my arrow key to arrow through and make sure that I stop on all of the double quotes and escape them. So I'm just escaping them with a backslash in front of all the instances of a double quote within the larger context of the string. Okay, and I think that that's all that I'm looking for. Okay, so there's my query. And so query with a key condition expression and a filter expression, so two different expressions. Two essentially where clauses if I was comparing this to a relational database, so two expressions, and then I supply values for both of those parameters, :t and :player, and I do that through the expression attribute values. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and if I've done this correctly, I should see, and it looks like I didn't, invalid filter expression. An expression attribute value. Sorry, I have mismatching value, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of repeat this whole thing. Okay, and where I went wrong is I was defining a value for :t and a value for :player, but you'll notice that I called :player actually just :p, so I got into basically a situation where I was on autopilot and I called my variable :p, and my variable name is actually :player in this case. Okay, and that's what the error condition was indicating. Okay, and now you'll notice that I've queried down to 4 records. I'm looking for all the players that belong to the Los Angeles Angels. There was 4 of them, but then after my filter, then I got down to the one specific record, which is Cole Calhoun. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste all of this. So I'm looking for a query. Oops. Whose table name is baseball stats. And we're doing it against our local instance. So our endpoint URL is our local machine. And we have the same key condition as before for our query. But this time we've added a filter expression where the player name equals player. and then we supply those values syntactically using JSON. Okay, so that's the expression attribute values that we're using. Okay, and it gets to be kind of a mess, and that's why I wanted to go through this syntax with you so we're able to do a query. The last example of what I want to do is I want to do a scan, but I want to scan and filter. So I'm going to do a scan with the filter expression being player name equal to player, and then I'll supply the value of Cole Calhoun again. So I'm going to do one more command, which will be an AWS DynamoDB scan. And we're doing that against our table name being baseball stats. And we're going to do that against our local machine. So we're going to have the endpoint URL pointing at our local machine. Okay, so we're doing our scan, but we're going to have a filter expression this time. So the same filter expression as before. So our filter expression will be player name equal to, and this time I'll use :P. Probably could be player, either way is okay. And then our expression attribute values. Okay, and our expression attribute values, I always start the same way because the syntax gets kind of complicated if you actually have an error. So I know that it's going to be JSON. I'm defining a value for :P. :P is some JSON object, and that JSON object is a string that has a value of Cole. I keep typing it wrong, Calhoun. Okay, so that's the correct JSON. I'm going to go back and I'm going to add double quotes. I'm going to escape the internal double quotes. Okay, and I'm doing a filter for that specific player. Okay, so I'm doing a scan to read all of the records, so I should be looking at 23 records, but then I'm looking for a specific record based on the filter expression, and if I hit enter to this, we see that one record. So I scanned 23 because I was doing a scan, but then I filtered it down to just that one record that we care about. Okay, and again, I will just copy and paste this command. So here's the scan. Oops. And our table name and endpoint URL are going to be the same, so I'm copying those from above. Maybe a bad idea, but that should work. And then our filter expression, which we can get here. So I'm looking for a specific player. So I'm just grabbing that from the history from the command prompt. And then lastly, I'm going to supply the value for :P, and that value is a JSON object that's a string, and the name is Cole Calhoun. Okay, so this is just an example of using a Windows command prompt and the specific syntax challenges that we'll have from a command prompt to do scans, queries, and filters, and combinations thereof. Okay.